This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country, and we join their calls for justice.
Well,
No.
it's Tom's birthday and he didn't fucking tell anyone. That's the real story of the week, though.
I tell people that I care about and that I value. The people who are close to me. I'm kidding. I love you.
That's fucked up.
My boyfriend gave me sex toys, so that was fun.
What kind?
Just some things to whack up the old date.
Oh my God. Speaking of sex toys, I'll just say this before Dorinda comes on. The other night, I was woken up in the middle of the night and I was like, what the fuck is this? Like, I was like so disoriented. I thought my phone was going off. It wasn't my phone. And I'm like half awake, like pulling my sleep mask off, being like, what's happening? Turning on the light. And it turns out it was my vibrator just randomly turned itself on, like in my metal drawer, and it's got shit like rattling on top of it. It was the loudest noise I've ever heard in my mouth. It was just like not in my mouth, in my.
Why was it in your mouth?
It wasn't in my mouth, I promise.
What set it off? How does a vibrator suddenly just operating?
I don't know. Who knows?
Anyway, you're listening to a podcast about Australian politics.
Talk about the Greens, that bunch of idiots.
The Greens Party is a party of hatred.
They want to destroy the social fabric of society.
These people, these Greens, they are snake oil salesmen.
She has described the Greens as very, very dangerous.
Frankly, I've always found the Greens to be a real serious danger to Australia.
Serious danger to Australia.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first ever episode of Serious Danger, a brand new podcast about the Greens politics in Australia. Truth, justice, freedom, taking our country back. My name is Tom Ballard. The four pillars of our wonderful party. My name is Tom Ballard. I'm a very silly comedian in Melbourne. Joining me, my co-host for this show, the delightful Emerald Moon. Hello.
Hi, Tom.
Look at us. We're doing it. We're doing the podcast.
I know, we're really doing it. Thanks for listening, Mum.
Disclaimer, this is not an official Greens Party podcast. We've had multiple legal experts make it very clear to us that we're not allowed to present as spokespeople for the party of the Australian Greens. We are Greens members, and we're here to fix everything. And we're going to explain to you exactly what this show is very shortly. We're going to talk about lying, evil politicians. And our first ever guest for our first week is the brand new Green Senator from Western Australia, Noongar Bibbulmun Yumuji woman and longtime campaigner Dorinda Cox, who is the Greens Party spokesperson for mining and resources, trade and science, and research and innovation.
All things I don't know much about, so excited to hear what she knows.
All right, should we start talking about what the hell this is?
Yes.
Serious danger.
Yes. What will we be doing on this show?
We are trying to make it something new and exciting, and hopefully that something's of benefit that will make you laugh and cry and learn stuff about the way politics is rolling out in this country from a Greens perspective. Okay, we're an independent podcast. As we say, we're not an official party podcast, but we're both members of the Greens. We think the Greens do some cool stuff. We'd like more Greens out there doing more Greens things to make things better for ordinary people. That's the general vibe, right? Let's lay it out a little bit. I mean, I've hosted another podcast, which some people might have come to this from that, called Like I'm a 6-Year-Old, which I've been doing since 2015, which was me talking to people about politics, about their beliefs, about what's going on in the world, trying to explain it like I'm a 6-year-old. And I still like doing that podcast. And it was interesting to learn more about politics and think more deeply about these kind of issues and how it affects everybody's life. But I just found myself hitting a wall and I was just talking about problems all the time. And it's just like, yeah, that's depressing. I hope that works out. Thanks for listening, everybody. Goodbye. And so I want to do something a bit more active and a bit more like trying to find a level of hope and a level of like who are the good people out there who are trying to actually do something about this? How can we do politics in a different way that might actually make the world less shit? And, I spoke to a bunch of members, Greens MPs and Greens aligned people on the podcast, and they were the ones that made me feel good and happy inside and filled my soul with hope. And so I eventually came up with this idea that maybe a podcast that's focused on what the Greens are doing, what they're about, why they're different, how we can grow the Greens movement and the party might be of some use. And so now we're here to fix the world. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, like you say, there are many podcasts, full stop. But there are a lot of kind of progressive leaning podcasts in Australia about Australian politics. But I don't think that a lot of them even have the space to deal with or talk about what the Greens are doing or what alternative vision the Greens might have, because there's just so much bullshit happening between the major parties, and there's always a Barney to talk about between Labor and the LNP. And while the Greens might be doing lots of exciting, fun things, doesn't normally get a look in.
And it's cool that we'll be able to, we'll criticize the party if we think they're doing something that we don't agree with necessarily. That's just our opinion. But, we'll share our thoughts and talk about those debates, and we will not hold back. Because I think that's a good way to go. We're not partisan hacks, that's for sure. But look, why don't we do a really basic shit, some entry-level stuff. Maybe some people listening to this, certainly aren't Greens members, might have voted Greens or been supporters or what have you. The Australian Greens was federated as a national party in 1992. That was the coming together of a bunch of state-based parties that all came from different traditions. New South Wales sort of grew out of the Green Bands movement, which involved unionists, some pretty radical militant unionists taking action and refusing to work on certain projects for environmental reasons. Very cool part of Australian history that I'd like to revisit on the podcast at some point.
Extremely
WA
cool.
Greens, you had a lot of tradition out of the anti-nuclear movement as well, all came together in 1992 and have been sticking around ever since, causing trouble, making good stuff happen. At the moment, at the federal level, there was one Greens MP in the House of Representatives. That is Anna Band, who's the leader of the party. We got 9 senators federally, all up. Across all the states, by my count, there are 21 Greens MPs in state parliaments at the moment. There are dozens of local councillors right across the country, particularly in Victoria. At the last local council elections in 2020, shitloads of Greens MPs got up, including the first ever majority Greens government, in theory, at the Yarra City Council level.
This is really fucking up my idea I had of the podcast, where I would be the smart one and Tom would be the funny one, because Tom's gone full nerd and done all his research and knows all these facts. Now what the fuck am I supposed to do?
Estimate of 15,000 members all up of Australian Greens in the country. Figuring out the membership level of parties is sort of complicated and hard, but that's the going estimate at the moment. 1.5 million people gave their first preference vote to the Greens at the 2019 election. The highest vote the party's ever recorded was in 2010, got 11.7% of the national vote. Polling around 11% at the moment, from my memory of the last sort of opinion poll I saw lately, however much store you said in that. But that's kind of the vibe. Now, obviously, we'll return to this, I think, throughout the life of the podcast. Obviously, we think that the Greens political project has more appeal than 11 or 12% of the Australian population. If we thought that, then we probably wouldn't fucking bother, right? But we have to try and do something to break the two-party system and to grow the party. That's kind of what the podcast is about as well. The party has been in alliance or a coalition in power-sharing arrangements with minority Labor governments in Tasmania at the state level in the early 90s, in the ACT since 2008, which is going very well, my understanding is, and, of course, federally from 2010 to 2013 with the Gillard Labor government, where we got some cool shit up indeed. So those are my cool facts. But Emerald, people would love to know about you and your politics and your relationship to the Australian Greens.
Well, yeah, I just realised I didn't really say who I am. Probably a lot of people know who Tom is because he's a famous comedian from the television and the radio.
What's my favourite thing that you've done? Let's just spend some time on your favourite highlights from my work.
Yeah. Probably my favourite thing of yours was not even the thing that you did. It was that cartoon of you on the ABC logo, like a spring getting ejected from the ABC. But
all right, put that link in the show notes, please, Michael. People need to see that.
It's a great cartoon. No, but yes, so my name's Emerald Moon. I'm from Meanjin, Brisbane. I'm originally actually from Bundjalung country, so northern New South Wales, Byron Shire region, which kind of helps explain why my name is Emerald Moon. Extremely hippie name, hippie parents. But yeah, I've been involved in the Queensland Greens since about 2017, and I ran as a candidate in the last federal election in 2019. I ran against Andrew Laming in the seat of Bowman. It was a wild ride. I think that's probably when I started getting really involved in politics, but I was also at the time had just started working. I started as an intern, but I work for one of the Queensland Greens state MPs. So I still do policy and comms work for Michael Berkman. But Yeah, I was just keen to
Just
do
to
a
clarify,
pod with-
everyone, you lost to Andrew Laming, really. So all the things that he's done since then, in a way,
my fault.
is your fault. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's true. That is true. It is my total failure. That's really kind of put us where we are. So,
Do you want to apologize for that to people who are listening now?
oh, fuck you, Tom.
Spring.
That's right. Next, some sort of cartoon that's actually just me pushing Tom out of the podcast. My long-term plan. But I think if folks know me and what I like to talk about, my big interests are really housing justice. I am effectively a lifelong renter, care deeply about renters' rights, and also very interested in stuff like drug policy. Having a big secret is I've never actually done drugs myself, but I think that our drug laws are deeply broken and drugs should be a health issue, not a criminal one. But I also just love the Greens. I think they're a nice party, even though I hate them sometimes. But we're better than all the rest, so.
Yes, well, totally, right. But is that also indicative of, and again, a theme that might recur on the podcast, your relationship to electoral politics, or at least, a realistic view to just how much change can happen solely if we view politics entirely through what happens in the parliament and how elections roll out every 3 years, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's a debate even as to what role the Greens can play, whether we are a protest party or whether we are aiming to form government. That's a live debate. But I also certainly believe that electoralism will not solve everything. We cannot have the kind of broad scale change that we need with electoralism alone, but it can be a part of a bigger puzzle. So that's why I do it. And I try to do other things too. Including
rocking out in a sick punk band.
Yes, I did have a band called Class War. Yes. It's a hardcore straight edge band, which probably won't mean much to many folks, but if there's any hardcore fans, punk fans out there, you can listen to Class War. We only did a demo and unfortunately are not a band anymore, but I'm still a rocker at heart.
Beautiful melodies that Class War, I think, produced. That was my favorite bit.
Sweet voice. Yes, you'll love it.
So just the record, I joined the Greens last year. I've been voting Greens for a very long time, supporting the Greens candidates. I also did endorse the Victorian Socialists at the 2018 state election campaign because they asked me. Well, they asked me to. I don't know. If the Greens asked me more, I'd probably say yes. Anything to get my face out there.
Rat. Traitor.
But, last year, particularly last year, right, 2020, insane pandemic, everything's crumbling around us. The ridiculousness of the status quo of neoliberal capitalism, of the way our politics works. If people remember those first couple of months when everything was nuts, when there was talk about nationalizing airlines that were collapsing and the huge amounts of spending that were going to be there to support, like everything was being turned upside down. It felt bizarre. It felt like we can't get through this using the same tools that we have before. I got to fucking put my money where my mouth is and signed up as a member to become involved in the Greens and to try and do what I can to help and to grow the party, and have now ended up here. And that's where we are, right? There's a federal election on the way in 2022 at some point, probably March or May is the general wisdom, is where it's going to be. We are slowly recovering from the pandemic in theory, although I'm just reading a news story today about a new variant that's worse than everything else. Have you seen that?
No.
Yeah, there's a new variant, baby. I'm sorry to bum everyone out, but the variant's coming and it's all over. No, we don't know. But, all the possibility, the political possibilities that COVID was supposed to open up about, we've got to build back better and what the country looks like on the other side of it. All those questions seem to have faded a little bit, but I think they're still very live to me and inspired me to try and get more involved and do something and get involved with a party that's genuinely grassroots, that doesn't accept political donations from corporations, and that says the things that I believe in, right? That regularly comes out with policy positions or has the guts to take the position that is the correct one, even if it's not politically possible, quote unquote, or pragmatic or whatever, or realistic and all that bullshit. But it's the right thing to do. I've found regularly that's where the Greens have ended up for me. So that's why I'm here anyway.
Yeah. And I think if folks are wondering, if this is the podcast for you, first of all, yes, it is.
Yes.
But second of all, I think that the people that would like us to be able to reach with this project are people who are interested in politics but feel like they haven't quite found their place yet, or they desperately have that kind of disillusionment and frustration and anger that we have, but haven't really found where they should channel it yet. Or maybe you're already involved a little bit, but you're like, okay, what else can I do? This is really feeling like I'm hitting my head against a brick wall. So we want it to be a place where we can talk about the barriers that we're coming up against, and what alternative solutions are available, but also things that you can do week to week to, make a positive difference in people's lives and ideally save us from impending climate collapse.
Yeah, just want to let you know you're not crazy, you're not alone, and there are other people who think like you, and better things are possible, and we don't have to accept the crap that's so regularly served up by a political and media class. And we could do heaps better. And we want this show to be a place where everyone can chip in their ideas. We want to hear from people. I'm sure I'm in Melbourne. No.
No, just kidding. I do. It's fun.
You're right. Fuck these people. I'm in Victoria. Emerald's in Queensland. If you're in other states across the country or territories, we want to hear from you. I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff we have no idea is going on that we'd love to hear from you. If you're a member of the party, a volunteer, if you've voted Greens, if you've thought about it, if you're curious, we'd love to hear from you. Get in touch. Let us know how we can grow the show. We'll be chatting to people within the party, obviously, with sitting MPs, candidates, maybe a little bit behind the scenes as well. But we also want to talk to other people on the left, on the Australian left, other from the union movement, the environmental movement, social justice, economic justice stuff, anyone and everyone that we like and approve of are welcome to chat to us. And we're stoked. We can't believe that people are already chipping into our Patreon. And to be clear, all that money is just going to cover the costs of running the podcast, so we can grow the podcast, do some more cool stuff, make sure our lovely producer, Michael Griffin, is reimbursed for his time and his labor. That money is going to go into growing Serious Danger and trying to make it really big, and at a cool place for people to come and listen to stuff and organize and begin the revolution.
Yay.
Final question before we move on into the actual news of the week, Emerald.
Yes.
I feel like some folks might be wondering, and you constantly face this question if you're a Greens supporter or a Greens member or a Greens voter, why not the ALP? Why not Labor? What is this podcast's relationship to the ALP? How are we going to think about Labor as another party, nominally in theory, of the left? For
me, I just think of it as that, Labor are just as worthy of scrutiny as any other party. I understand that they're notionally to the left of the LNP on the political spectrum, and most of the time the LNP will be far shitter than them. But I think that that's actually one of the things that we can do is provide a critique of Labor where that might often be missing from mainstream media discussions about Australian politics, where it's only seen as two solutions. There's Labor's semi-shit way, or there's the LNP's shit way, and that's worthy of being called out. But obviously, the goal in this coming election, that we've been quite open about, and Adam Bant's been quite open about, is that we can win balance of power with Labor and getting that power sharing arrangement that's enabled us to win things like dental into Medicare for kids before, because we are in a position where we can do that. We can actually push them to be better than they are.
Yay. Go team.
Yeah.
Reach out to us. Let us know your thoughts, your feelings, your trollings. Send us your nudes. You can find us on social media at Serious Danger AU on Twitter and Instagram. We're on YouTube as well. And anytime you can email us, hello@seriousdangerpod.com.
Member for Kennedy has clearly a lot of us are very confused. I'm one of the dumber ones, so I'm really at a loss. Is there a point of order?
All right, so let's talk about big liars and Hawaii.
Together at last.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You would have thought maybe that we would never have to hear about Scott Morrison's stupid bloody Hawaii holiday again, but not so. This week it was again, for some reason, a top story. Basically, Scott Morrison was he had a go at Anthony Albanese for repeatedly criticising him for going to Hawaii during the bushfires, and said that he'd actually texted Anthony Albanese and told him where he was going as he was about to get on the plane. But then, twist, turn, shock, horror, Anthony Albanese stood up.
Don't bother sexing this up. Don't in any way try to invest in making this as interesting.
I know, you can tell from the tone of my voice that I don't think it's twist, turn, shock, horror. I think it's fucking boring, but we're going to get through this. Anthony Albanese said, no, it's not true. He said he was going on leave, but he didn't tell me he was going to Hawaii, which is the important part apparently. And people generally are acting like this is an important thing. Personally, I do not really give a shit where he was going on leave. I give a shit that he's a terrible prime minister with terrible climate policy that has driven us to the point where we had these life-destroying bushfires. But I really don't care what he was texting Anthony Albanese. I don't know. Is it just me?
No, I'm very much on board. And look, we should make it clear. We realise that if we don't care about it, maybe we shouldn't talk about it on a podcast. But we thought it was worth making this point, right? So Parliament is back for these 2 weeks, but the last sitting weeks really before the election. This is the last sitting weeks of the year, certainly. And there were a bunch of issues being kicked around. You might have heard about religious discrimination bill, a voter ID laws, all important issues in their own way. But we wanted to zero in on this bullshit because we reckon it's something that this podcast can be a little bit different in that we want to call out this nonsense and the fact that this dominated the news on a regular basis, the intricate details of a text exchange from 2 years ago, and the accusation that our Prime Minister is a liar, and as if we should all clutch our pearls at that proposition and be horrified at the state of our wonderful civil institutions. It's all fucking bullshit that doesn't matter, and we should all let it go.
He lied in the text. He lied about the text, and he also has been texting other people, like the French Prime Minister, and he's a big liar because of this.
Okay, and that affects ordinary people's lives how?
Well, we think it makes a good headline and tweet.
Lies are bad. As James Hennessy tweeted, I think he tweeted it best this week, I hate it when the liar from the Shire tells one of his trademark lies. I'm just like, we've established he's a liar. All politicians lie. Certainly governments especially. All governments are lying. All politicians are lying. Yeah. They're twisting the truth. They're exaggerating it. They will say and do things to hang on to power as much as possible.
Hate to bloody break it to you.
Harden the fuck up. But it's important because this is clearly a big line that Labor is running on, right? This started because the Labor MP from Gilmore was asking why he lied. And it is bizarre, to be fair, that Scott Morrison's office told journalists that he was not in Hawaii and that it was not a story and wouldn't confirm of that. It is a very bizarre little factor. And yes, Scott Morrison does lie a lot and he will blatantly say, I didn't say something when he clearly did and when there's footage of that. But this is clearly an angle Labor is going on. You can't trust this guy on anything he says. He says he didn't use the term Shanghai Sam, but he actually said it on 17 different occasions. And here's the footage and stuff. They're trying to hammer this angle regularly that, he lies. You can't trust anything he says. Now, in their defense, sometimes they do tie it to policy. Julian Hill, the Labor MP, has sort of said he lies about wages going backwards, use that as a chance to talk about how the fact that real wages have fallen under this coalition government. They're doing very badly. Albanese also tried to, say, Morrison's lying while we here at Labor have a plan to build that back better after COVID. But they really do seem to think that this attack will work as a political angle on Morrison and the Morrison government. And I would humbly suggest that most people think that all politicians are fucking lying all the time. If a person in a suit is on TV and talking, chances are they're spinning and serving you up some bullshit. No?
I mean, I also wonder if it's them trying to turn back the coalition's tactics that have been used on Labor against them. Like if you think about, the deeply gendered use of Julia to talk about Julia Gillard, and there was a lot of there was Shifty Bill talking about Bill Shorten. I think that the idea that Labor leaders are untrustworthy has been exploited by the coalition in many previous elections, and maybe Labor is thinking that that's why they won in those instances and that maybe they should use it back against them. But once again, I am begging Labor to not just do what the LNP does back at them as a response.
Also, the Shanghai Sam thing is so interesting to me because that's a reference to Sam Dastyari. So Labor is now bringing our minds back to Sam Dastyari, who had to resign in disgrace because he got a Chinese company with ties to the Chinese Communist Party to pay his legal bills and stuff. So now you're just reminding people about that guy from your party who did some pretty fucking dodgy stuff that people probably care more about than the Prime Minister telling a fib.
I mean, I know it's almost reminiscent of, it almost feels as though it's an attempt to rewrite history, and there was kind of this vibe at the time, I remember, of the Sam Dastyari stuff, that it was a witch hunt. And I mean, that's the exact same language that's being used now to describe the ICAC investigations into Gladys Berejiklian. So, but that's why it's fascinating to me that Labor or anyone really thinks that they can win people over by trying to paint the picture that lying is a thing that one party does and the other doesn't, that's a differentiating point between the major parties, or that, trustworthiness is something that you can attach to your party and shiftiness is something you can attach to the other party. Because I think ordinary people know damn well that you can't bloody trust politicians. Even if you could, they wouldn't trust them. People do not trust these people. And that's not how you're going to earn their trust, is simply by making lying a political issue. And I just think it's also, it's a distraction. And the whole Hawaii thing was always an unnecessary and a really frustrating distraction from the problem at that time, which was that, Scott Morrison's government was completely failed to do what it could to prevent, the climate crisis reaching this point that drove those bushfires, but also failed to respond in a proper way, and failed to even put in any mitigating measures after that to beef up our firefighting services, or to, introduce a levy on coal and gas corporations to fund something like that. All of these policy decisions are shit. I don't really care that there's a photo of Scott Morrison in a Hawaiian t-shirt with that stupid midsummer thing on his head. I care that he backs in fossil fuel corporations and their projects that are frying my planet.
And that's so key, right? Because this discourse, these attacks, they're devoid of ideology or worldview or anything. It's we're the good people who don't tell lies, and they're the bad people who do tell you lies, as opposed to actually sort of saying, no, their entire political project, what they stand for, when they tell you the truth, it's still bad, okay? Because they're telling you a vision and a policy prescription for this country that fucks over ordinary working people and just helps out their donors and their rich mates, right? Those I would have thought are the kind of attacks that you want to see. Yeah. And the obsession with lying and stuff and exposing this, you saw this a lot in the Trump era, right? Exactly. the Pinocchio system and the New York Times compiled every single Donald Trump lie everywhere, and it did nothing.
Fact checks aren't going to win you an election.
No one cares.
Absolutely not. I think it's interesting. There's this sort of accepted wisdom, particularly on the, somewhat progressive side of Australian politics, that the problem is that voters care more about values and personalities, and that they don't really care about policies. But I actually don't think that's true. And there is a lot of evidence that when you talk to people on their level and just treat them with respect and talk to them about policies that'll make a difference in their life, they do care about it. And the problem is that the discourse and the political landscape has just been so devoid of any policies that will actually make a difference in their lives and that are exciting and that make people want to go out and vote for someone, that void is filled with personality politics and just values-based. Scott Morrison's Christian, so if you're Christian, you vote for him. That's not because that's how people think about these decisions, because they're stupid or something. People aren't stupid. They will pay attention to policies if you actually give them any that matter.
Yeah. Policies like, making dental part of Medicare, that kind of thing, and fully fund taxing billionaires to fully fund health and education. Oh, that's interesting. Now, we should say, in full disclosure and in all fairness, on the 12th of November, Adam Bandt, the leader of the Australian Greens, did tweet, "There used to be a time when a Prime Minister lying would be a national scandal. Now, it's just another Friday."
Did there,
which is kind of like
sorry. Like, I don't know about that.
Now, we've said that, and moving forward, we want to make sure this podcast is talking about the real shit, the stuff that does actually matter, that isn't a distraction that's designed to bore you and discourage you from caring about politics and thinking about ways that things could be better. So we've said that in our first episode. This is fucking bullshit. And here's to a better future podcast discussion from here on in.
Absolutely.
Now listen closely, because at the end of this term, there will be an election.
Okay, let's talk to our first ever guest on Serious Danger, a politician who has never told a lie in her life, unlike all the others. She's the new Green Senator for Western Australia. She's an anti-domestic violence campaigner, a Noongar Bibbulmun Yamatji woman, and former police officer, Dorinda Cox. Hello, and thank you for joining us on Serious Danger.
Thanks, Tom.
Yay! You're new, you're fresh. You replaced Rachel Stewart. She was there for 16 years, I believe, as the senator for WA for a very long time, filling her very big shoes. You've been there for a couple of months. How's it going? How is it being an Australian senator?
Yeah, it's quite obviously a very life-altering experience. I don't think there's really a training program or a crash course that you can take to sort of become a senator. So I've sat in the Senate for 12 days. So 12 days is a very, very short amount of time. So although I was sworn in a few months ago, you only get to be in the Parliament, for that 4 days of the week. And it's quite the experience. It's a new look into the world of how political leadership operates in this country, and good, bad, and ugly, and otherwise. And so it really it is a bit of a culture shock, to be honest. I think is probably a way to describe it. But I'm really enjoying the role, and really exciting of the potential of the opportunities and that we're able to make change, for everyday Australians. So, the work is ever flowing, and there's always something to do. But the challenge is making sure that you can craft it in a way that's going to work for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, you say that there's no training course for being a politician, but it's funny because a lot of the people in there have been through some sort of training course in that they've done student politics or they've done the classic degrees and the classic professions, whereas you're very much not a career politician. You don't necessarily fit that stereotype. Like, you have had a lot of experiences outside of politics before this, right?
Yeah, and I did say that in my first speech, actually, that I'm not a career politician. I don't come from a family that had any sort of grounding in politics, which I think always helps you. I wasn't a staffer. I didn't work for a politician before I came into office, and so that's I think that's the clear pathway for people. You're a lawyer, you're an engineer, you've done political science is sort of the real grounding for this work. And
Think tank is very popular. You got to get into those sweet think tanks and then work your way up.
Yeah. And so for me, it is about the life experience. And, although I've probably worked in policy maybe 15, 20 years, and so my grounding in being able to understand what policy does and doesn't do for, like I said, everyday Australians is probably where my experience is really grounded.
Yeah.
We represent a grassroots movement in our party, so it is about people who don't have money to splash around to have access to politicians through their their donation parties or fundraisers or whatever they do to get access. In a grassroots party like ours, we don't take any of those sort of corporate donations. So we're not held to ransom pretty much of people saying, we give you money, we want you to do this in the Parliament, and we want you to talk about this, and we want you to pass laws that are going to benefit us. And that's unfortunately what's happening, in this country.
We want to get to what went down in the Senate this week and some of the big issues you've been dealing with, particularly in your portfolio. But just really quickly, can you just tease that out for people a little bit more about your background and how, I guess, you came to be involved with the Greens and how you came to your Greens politics?
So when I was 17, I came to the Parliament to visit my mum. She worked in the Commonwealth, and just before I joined WA Police. And so I read the Redfern statement, Paul Keating, And he talked about, the smashing of the culture and traditional way of life for people and taking away babies. And in my mum's family, we're 5 generations of the Stone generation. So I almost felt like standing in the public gallery that Paul Keating was talking to me and he understood my story. I was a member of the Labor Party a very, very long time ago, and I've spoke about this recently at one of our new member events and said that the meeting that I went to meet my local member, who now is in the state parliament, the member for mining. So obviously I have the mining portfolio in the Australian Greens. So Bill Johnston was the person who was the local member at the time, went to this Labor Party meeting and he didn't even glance at me, introduce himself. And so I felt quite separated from, why am I paying a membership at a political party where I don't feel welcome? And so I went home very, very, very angry, I think, like very frustrated that I'd taken my time out to participate in what I thought was a democratic process, but he almost talked at me. So many years later, I met Lynn McLaren. She said to me, would you run as a candidate for the Greens? And I said, why me? Like, that didn't make sense. Instead of the numbers short or, I didn't actually think I had any potential. So I did a lot of thinking about how this party aligned with my values and was I going to have the same experience I had at Labor? And I didn't. The moment I walked in the door, people embraced me. I became part and parcel of the party, and it was a really lovely, warm feeling. And I just knew at that point that this is the party that I wanted to remain in. The values of the environment obviously are quite aligned with First Nations people. Caring for country is the blood that runs through my veins, and so it was easy for me to talk about the values of the party because that's who I am. And so I didn't have to make stuff up. I didn't have to pretend I didn't know what the party line was. The party line is the way I live.
That's so good to hear. And now look at you. You're a bloody senator for the great state of Western Australia.
I know. It's still taking a while to sink in, let me tell you. I still look around the room and someone says, excuse me, Senator. I still glance around to go, I wonder who's here. So it's a bit of time, I think. Yeah.
Do you want to crack on to the stuff of this week, Emerald?
Yeah, sure. So Dorinda, the Scarborough and the Betaloo projects. So for anyone that missed it on Tuesday, Woodside BHP basically confirmed that it'll go ahead with the Scarborough gas project, which is off the coast of your home state, WA. And it'll be Australia's biggest oil and gas development in more than 10 years. So even just briefly, could you run us through what exactly this project will mean for the climate? It's gas. Does the argument that it's just replacing dirtier coal actually stand up at all?
It's going to be bigger than Adani, and it is the dirty gas that is worse than coal, and 1.69 billion tonnes of emissions will be released. That's 15 coal-powered stations a year. Like not over the lifetime of the project, per year. We've just weeks out from COP26 and, the commitment that others globally have made to not open new gas fields and to move away from coal. And yet we've got an Australian government who are just handing out cash like it's going out of fashion, and a WA government that's approving these what I'm calling a massive sort of climate gas bomb, really, that they're setting off in our backyards in Western Australia. It's just phenomenal. Like, this is going to have huge impact across the ecosystem and just for people generally. First Nations people in this part of the country have said no to this project, and the Murrujuga rock art that exists there is 80,000 years old.
That's crazy.
Like, we've dated that back now, that this is the first etching in rock art of a human face, like ever. Yeah.
I saw you mentioned that in your speech in Parliament. It's incredible that that's apparently worth throwing away for this corporation's profits, while destroying the planet while they're at it,
And so, like, if you've got something that precious, we shouldn't be ruining it to go and pump a bit of gas out of the ground and open that up. It should remain there. And we're not even thinking about the fact that Japan, China, Korea are all moving away from exporting gas. So they're not even buying our gas anymore. So we don't even know why it's coming out of the ground because it's not going to be exported, right? Are we going to buy this gas? Probably not. This is the situation we're in, and these are the conversations I'm having in the Parliament going, I don't even see a purpose for it. And I have trade as one of my other portfolios. So I'm sort of on the continuum of why mine it, why bring it out of the ground, why you think there's got to be a customer at the end of that because that's what your business model is, right? And there's nothing. And then they talk about jobs. It's not going to create any new jobs on the ground. So, it's like myth busting. Every single thing that they come up with, I have to go away and actually look at it and go, nope, that's not happening.
At this point, it really seems like it's an ideological commitment to gas and coal, right? And it's this fear of being seen as anti-fossil fuels. And I'm in Queensland, obviously, and what's happened, what happened at the Juukan Gorge, what's happening here, we're just seeing again and again these corporations allowed to desecrate sacred sites. It's just happened at the Carmichael mine site, the Adani mine, where, Wangan and Jagalingu, traditional owners there are defending their land. But I think what's perhaps even more devastating in all of these situations is that it's being backed in and supported by Labor governments. Labor extinguished native title for the Adani mine and the WA, this approval of the Scarborough project. That's completely supported by the WA Labor government to the point that, the Labor Premier, Mark McGowan, is in the media saying that if environmental groups challenge in court to this project is successful, he will potentially spend public money making sure that it goes ahead or pass legislation to make sure that it goes ahead. He's said to the media, the state government will do what it has to do to make sure industries stay open. And it's just astounding to me that these Labor governments are actually doing that there's bipartisan support for this.
And we've seen this time and time again, April, in the chamber where Labor don't vote against the government. They don't sit with the Greens on this, and the Greens are really the only ones saying that this is a huge risk to our climate. If we're going to stay on under that 1.5 degrees of global warming, we've got to stop doing this, and we've got to stop kidding ourselves. And I call it gaslighting. It's it's the analogy that I like to use that we're creating that distorted reality to the Australian public, right? We're creating a false narrative around saying to the broader public, you know what, it's not a real problem. No, it's not important. We'll get to net zero, in 2050. But in the meantime, we have the Torres Strait Islands underwater. We're talking to our Pacific partners who are buying up new islands. Like this, Australia isn't part of the understanding of what this means. Mark McGowan can talk about spending public money and saving the industry and projects, but it's all on our taxpayer dollars, right? Because we're the ones cleaning up the mess. We're the ones paying from a government perspective. Our taxes go higher. We're not taxing billionaires in this space. We're not taxing them to put money back into our public services like our hospitals, like our like dental back into Medicare, increasing childcare. We're not doing things for everyday Australians because the billionaires are the ones making the money and the billionaires are getting the tax cuts, and then we're picking up the bill for all these broken projects at the end of it. They just abandon a project and go, oh, we're in liquidation, but we'll pass it on to the Australian taxpayer. And that's the thing that infuriates me is that's the false narrative that we're being sold. If you even put First Nations heritage to the side for just 1 minute, there's just no logical argument to why the Australian, public money should be given to these projects. It's just phenomenal.
Yeah, and so this is the project that apparently Scott Morrison did a bit of a jig, in his words, to the Business Council of Australia about when he heard that it was going ahead. Such a destructive project, and it just goes to show the massive support from both major parties for these kind of projects. And like you say, Dorinda, spending taxpayer money on gas that doesn't stack up in any way. The other big project that we're looking at the moment is fracking the NT, fracking the Betaloo Basin. And I know that the Greens have been pushing for the Senate to block that public funding. What happened so far this week about that? Where is that up to?
So the disallowance motion for the Betaloo Basin hasn't been, keeps getting put off the agenda. What happens is the more urgent legislation and more urgent business that gets put into the Senate, this gets put further and further back. But there is a disallowance motion to say that we've got what's called a guillotine for Monday for the disallowance vote or the motion to be put forward. Now, we've had a couple of votes on this. So this is a $50 million slush fund, right, for fracking in the NT. And opening up all of those wells across the Betaloo Basin will obviously go down into the water table, into the aquifers, and will cause what the traditional owners are saying is poison. CSIRO have done some preliminary research. It's been ignored, been shelved, not important, it's not going to kill anyone. But instead, this is the government saying we'll give $50 million to the Betaloo Basin project and, don't see the environmental impact on that. Another climate gas bomb that we're going to set off.
Yeah, no.
The risk for that from a climate perspective is going to be unlivable. People are not going to be able to live on that part of the country, so they're going to have to move. And it's crazy.
Sounds like can-do capitalism to me, giving $50 million to private companies to fuck up the environment. Yeah. So this disallowance motion is pushing back. As we said, are we still unclear as to where exactly Labor is on this Betaloo project and whether they would at all consider joining the Greens and other crossbenchers in voting to disallow this and certainly not dedicating public money to the project?
We have no line of sight of Labor's position. The only person we know who would vote with us would be Senator McCarthy. So Malarndirri McCarthy is a traditional owner from Baralula, and Malarndirri urged her party herself at the last sitting to vote with the Greens and think about this project seriously because she knows the impact. She knows what that will mean for her family and her traditional owner group. And again, we hear the manufactured consent of these companies. So they're making people sign agreements whose English is their sixth language. Come on, really?
Dorinda, before you go, we wanted to touch on a big win this week. You were able to secure a Senate inquiry into missing and murdered First Nations women and children. What's next with that? Great win for us yesterday. Came on, I suppose, giving you some background on that. In this, there were 76 people or women that we identified who were missing and murdered in this country. We were thinking there has to be something we can do to trigger an inquiry of, a national sort of magnitude. And so I had spoken to a Labor senator about this, and she said, well, if it was proposed by one of your senators, we would back it. And so I, obviously crafted into my speech in a way that I was signalling to them this is something that I would put forward. About 48 hours ago, I received the call from the minister, and she said, I've read your terms of reference, very keen for you to put this motion forward. We would support it from a government perspective. So I walked the halls and spoke to the crossbenchers and spoke to Labor and got unanimous support for this inquiry, which heartens me a little bit. I feel like if we can all come together on an issue that is so important for First Nations people in this country, the Constitutional and Legal Senate Committee will now take carriage of this inquiry. And so what we've done is we've given them a reporting timeframe by the end of June next year. So Senator Lydia Thorpe is our member for that committee, and she was the co-signatory for this motion yesterday. So Lydia will take carriage of this now into the committee. Awesome.
Well, I'm sure that some of the things that come out of the inquiry will be very startling and depressing, but it's a very good thing that it is happening. That is a win, and thank you very much for your advocacy on that. A great reason to re-elect Lydia Thorpe. She's up for election at the next election next year. You're safe, is that right, Dorinda? You'll keep on going for the foreseeable future.
No, Lydia,
you're up as well.
Lydia and I are both up for a re-election because our seats are casual vacancies. So we replace Rachel and Richard, and so we're one of senators, I think, in Australia that are up for a re-election this round. So, yeah, we're fighting for our seats. And it's work like this that do have the little wins for us. But, we are fighting. We're going to be campaigning hard going into the election cycle now once we have some more indication of when that might happen. But, we need all the help we can get to get re-elected because the more Greens we have in the Senate, balance of power we can have, which means that we can force, should it be Labor, them to go faster and further on climate action, but also the social issues that we know that are really important. Although we have support, these are things that have never been done before by the other parties. So these are things that are really important for people who are so marginalised in our communities, and that the Greens are really showing that national leadership in this space.
Rock and roll. Well, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks so much for being on our first episode of Serious Danger. Solidarity with you. Good luck. Keep up the good fight. Thanks, Dorinda.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Emerald.
But I just hope that people in this place listen to that very, very clear letter from Northern Territory traditional owners. If you can't do that, then please take your dot paintings down.
Okay, podcast's almost over, but before we leave you, want to give you something that you can actually do to make a difference in the real world, not on this podcasting app. And one of the things that you can do, especially if you're in New South Wales, well, only if you're in New South Wales this week, is get out and vote Greens.
You can try and vote in the New South Wales local election if you're in Queensland.
I think that's fraud.
Really,
yeah, you won't have a good time. No, if you are an enrolled voter in New South Wales, you can vote in the local government elections. The actual election date is on the 4th of December, but pre-poll is open now. So get down and vote for your local Greens candidates. But another reminder that if you potentially missed the deadline to update your enrolment for that election or wherever you are across the country, there's obviously a much bigger federal election coming up, and it's important that your enrolment details are up to date. So go to aec.gov.au and do that now. Wait, no, finish the podcast and then do it.
Then do it. If you're in, obviously all Greens candidates are perfect and wonderful, but Sylvia Ellsmore in particular, I've interviewed for my podcast. She's running for the Mayor of Sydney and she has kick-ass policies on housing and stuff. So at least check her out if you're considering voting in that local election. Do it. I'm going to plug say no to Scarborough.com.au. That is a website which has more details about the Scarborough project. It really is a fucking climate bomb and disaster, and we need to do something about that. And lots of different groups, from Greenpeace to Market Forces to the Conservation Council of Western Australia, are coming together, like joining forces, like not Megatron, but the one where all the things like all the Power Rangers come together and form the one big robot in order to take on this project from Woodside and BHP.
All great
it's really
references
bad.
for Zoomers.
Pokemon, it's like that. Say no to Scarborough.com.au. Head there and find out some more details.
And don't forget to contact Labor senators and tell them to support the Greens and the Crossbench's motion to block the Betaloo Basin fracking public money. There are some great resources on the Australian Greens social media about how to make these kind of calls and what you can say, even if you've never done this kind of call before. But it's incredibly important. We only have, by the time this podcast comes out, it'll be maybe one day. It'll be Monday that the vote's happening. So go and do that now if you're listening on Sunday night or Monday.
We'll put through links and more information in the show description and the show notes to help you out. But thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Emerald. We did it. We did our first little show.
Can we keep going?
Yes, let's keep podcasting forever. We'll be back next week on Sunday. Make sure you subscribe to this show, like it, share it around. Find us on social media at Serious Danger AU on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Or you can just go to seriousdangerpod.com. Rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the podcasts. All that stuff really helps get the word out and grow it. This show is produced by the wonderful Michael Griffin. It's made possible with the help of the Green Institute. If you want to say hello to us, email us anytime at hello@seriousdangerpod.com. Thank you, comrades. See you next week.
And may the four pillars be with you.
Indeed.
Serious danger to Australia.